The studio buzzed with anticipation as the audience settled in for another episode of the talk show. Stephen Colbert, with his trademark charisma, commanded the stage, his sharp wit ready to dissect the world's chaos. Tonight's guest was Elon Musk, the tech titan whose every move sparked headlines. The pairing promised fireworks, but no one could predict the inferno that would erupt. Why was Musk here? Was it to defend his latest venture, or to dodge the growing scrutiny around his influence? Could Colbert, known for his incisive humor, keep the conversation light, or would he probe too deep? The crowd sensed tension, their murmurs a low hum, as the cameras rolled. Colbert opened with his monologue, skewering recent political absurdities before pivoting to technology's grip on society. His jokes about billionaires shaping the future landed pointedly, each one a subtle jab at his guest. Musk, seated offstage, watched with a tight smile, his eyes betraying a flicker of irritation. The host's barbs weren't new, but they carried an edge tonight, as if Colbert was laying groundwork for a confrontation. Was he baiting Musk, or simply playing to the room? The audience laughed, but their applause felt cautious, sensing the undercurrent. When Musk strode onto the stage, the crowd erupted. His presence was electric, his confidence unshakable. He settled into the guest chair, his posture relaxed, but his gaze sharp. Colbert wasted no time, diving into Musk's latest project, a neural interface technology aimed at merging human minds with artificial intelligence. The host framed it as revolutionary, but questioned its risks, his tone probing. Could such power be trusted in private hands? Wasn't this a step too far even for a visionary? Musk responded with practiced ease, touting the potential to cure diseases and expand human potential. His answers were polished, but his smirk suggested he was humoring the host. The conversation shifted to social media, a topic ripe with controversy. Colbert pressed Musk on his platform's role in amplifying division, citing recent uproar over misinformation campaigns. The host's questions grew pointed, his humor laced with accusation. Musk's demeanor cooled, his responses shorter, his irritation palpable. The audience leaned forward, sensing the shift. Colbert, perhaps emboldened by the crowd's energy, pushed harder, questioning Musk's commitment to free speech versus his selective moderation. Was he a champion of truth or a gatekeeper with an agenda? The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Musk's patience frayed as Colbert doubled down, framing the tech mogul as a figurehead for unchecked power. The host's tone remained playful, but his words cut deep, suggesting Musk's influence bordered on dangerous. The guest's jaw tightened, his fingers drumming on the armrest. The audience caught it, their murmurs growing. Something was brewing, something raw. Colbert, sensing the moment, leaned in, his next question a dagger aimed at Musk's legacy. Would history see him as a savior, or a man who toyed with forces he couldn't control? The question hung unanswered, as Musk's eyes narrowed, his composure cracking. The silence after Colbert's pointed question lingered, a charged pause that gripped the studio. Musk's narrowed eyes locked onto the host, his earlier smirk replaced by a steely glare. The audience held its breath, their anticipation a palpable force. Colbert, undeterred, leaned back in his chair, his expression a mix of challenge and amusement, as if daring his guest to respond. The stage was no longer a platform for banter, it had become a battleground, and neither man seemed willing to yield. Musk broke the silence, his voice calm but laced with an edge that cut through the room. He deflected Colbert's question about his legacy, pivoting to the broader impact of technology on humanity. His words were measured, but the undertone was unmistakable. He was tired of being painted as the villain. He spoke of innovation as a force for progress, accusing critics like Colbert of fear-mongering to score points. The audience stirred, some nodding, others shifting uncomfortably. The guest was pushing back, and the host's playful facade began to crack. Colbert seized the moment, steering the conversation toward Musk's public persona. He referenced recent controversies, from inflammatory posts to corporate decisions that sparked outrage. The host's tone grew sharper, his questions less about policy and more about character. He painted Musk as a provocateur, someone who thrived on chaos, rather than solutions. The crowd's reactions were mixed, cheers mingling with murmurs, as if unsure whether to back the host or the guest. Musk's fingers stopped drumming. His hands now rested firmly on the chair, a sign of restraint under strain. The tension escalated when Colbert brought up a recent global summit on artificial intelligence regulation. He pressed Musk on his absence, suggesting it showed a disregard for accountability. The accusation landed like a spark on dry tinder. Musk's composure slipped further, his response biting as he challenged the summit's legitimacy, calling it a bureaucratic charade. He turned the tables, questioning Colbert's understanding of the technology he critiqued so freely. The jab was personal, a subtle dig at the host's credentials, and the audience gasped, sensing the shift from debate to confrontation. Colbert's smile tightened, but he didn't retreat. He countered by highlighting public concerns about Musk's influence over critical infrastructure, from satellite networks to energy grids. The host's words were careful but loaded, implying a dangerous concentration of power. The crowd's energy surged, feeding off the escalating clash. Musk's irritation boiled over, his voice rising as he accused Colbert of pandering to fear, rather than grappling with progress. The guest's words were sharp, dismissive, and the room felt the weight of his disdain. As the segment neared its commercial break, the argument reached a fever pitch. Colbert, sensing the audience's rapt attention, pressed one final point, questioning Musk's motives in shaping public discourse. The host's tone was accusatory, his implication clear. Musk's ambitions were less about humanity than ego. The guest's face darkened, his restraint fraying to its limit. The audience leaned forward, hearts racing as Musk prepared to respond, his next words poised to change the night's course. The studio crackled with raw energy as Musk's darkened expression signaled a turning point. The audience, caught in the crossfire of the escalating clash, waited for his response to Colbert's accusation of ego-driven ambition. The host sat back, his confident posture masking the unease flickering in his eyes. He had pushed hard, perhaps too hard, and the guest was no longer playing defense. The air was thick with expectation, every viewer sensing that the next exchange would tip the confrontation into uncharted territory. Musk leaned forward, his voice low but piercing, as he dismantled Colbert's framing. He didn't defend his motives. Instead, he attacked the host's approach, accusing him of trivializing complex issues for laughs. The guest's words were surgical, cutting into Colbert's persona as a truth-teller. He suggested the host thrived on outrage, just as much as the figures he critiqued, a hypocrite cloaked in comedy. The audience gasped, some clapping, others stunned, as the insult landed. It was a bold move, turning the spotlight on Colbert's own influence, and it stung. The host's face betrayed a flash of shock before he masked it with a forced chuckle. He tried to pivot, tossing out a light jab about Musk's sensitivity, but the attempt fell flat. The crowd's energy had shifted, their allegiance no longer firmly with Colbert. Musk seized the moment, pressing his advantage. He spoke of the sacrifices behind his work, the sleepless nights and relentless scrutiny, framing himself as a man, misunderstood by critics too comfortable to grasp his vision. His tone was passionate, almost vulnerable, and it resonated with pockets of the audience. Colbert, sensing the tide turning, doubled down. He steered the conversation to a recent labor dispute at one of Musk's companies, painting it as evidence of exploitation under the guise of innovation. The host's questions were relentless, each one designed to provoke. He suggested Musk's wealth insulated him from the consequences of his decisions, a charge that struck at the guest's core. The audience murmured, some nodding in agreement. But others seemed swayed by Musk's earlier defiance. The room was divided, and the tension was suffocating. Musk's response was a masterclass in controlled fury. He didn't deny the dispute, but challenged its portrayal, accusing Colbert of cherry-picking facts to fit a narrative. His voice rose, not in anger, but in conviction, as he spoke of the workers who believed in his mission, the ones rarely mentioned in headlines. He turned the accusation back on Colbert, questioning whether the host had ever risked anything for a cause beyond ratings. The jab was ruthless, implying cowardice, and the audience erupted, some cheering, others booing. The line had been crossed, and Colbert's composure faltered. The host's eyes narrowed, his smile gone. He leaned forward, ready to fire back, but the segment's time was up. The director signaled for a break, and the cameras cut to commercial. The audience buzzed, their whispers a cacophony of shock and excitement. Behind the scenes, Colbert's team scrambled, sensing the interview slipping out of control. Musk sat back, his expression unreadable, while the host stared ahead, his mind racing. The confrontation was far from over, and the next segment promised to be explosive. The commercial break did little to cool the simmering tension in the studio. As the cameras rolled again, the audience's restless energy filled the space, their earlier division now a palpable rift. Colbert, visibly steeled, adjusted his tie, his face a mask of determination. Musk's cutting remark about his cowardice lingered, a wound the host couldn't ignore. The guest, meanwhile, sat with an air of quiet defiance, his earlier fury replaced by a calculated calm. The stage was set for a reckoning, and every viewer knew it. Colbert opened the segment with a deliberate shift, moving away from personal jabs to a broader challenge. He questioned Musk's vision for humanity's future, zeroing in on his plans for space exploration. The host framed it as a billionaire's vanity project, a distraction from earthly problems like inequality and climate collapse. His tone was measured, but the accusation was clear. Musk's priorities were out of touch. The audience leaned in, some nodding at the critique, others waiting for the guest's rebuttal. The host was trying to reclaim control, but the earlier exchange had left cracks in his armor. Musk responded with a passion that caught the room off guard. He spoke of space as humanity's lifeline, a hedge against extinction, and dismissed Colbert's framing as short-sighted. His words were fervent, painting a picture of a species bound for the stars, not shackled by cynicism. The guest's intensity was magnetic, drawing cheers from parts of the crowd. He didn't attack Colbert directly, but let his vision stand, in stark contrast to the host's skepticism, making the critique seem small by comparison. The audience's applause grew, and Colbert's grip on the narrative weakened. Sensing the shift, the host pivoted to a more provocative angle. He brought up recent public backlash against Musk's influence in global policy, citing his outspoken views on regulation. Colbert suggested the tech mogul saw himself above governance, a dangerous precedent for democracy. The question was loaded, designed to rile Musk and rally the audience. Some clapped, but others shifted uncomfortably, wary of the host's relentless prodding. The room felt like a powder keg, and Colbert was striking matches. Musk's response was a slow burn, his voice steady but laced with contempt. He accused Colbert of pandering to a system that stifled progress, one that rewarded complacency over courage. Then came the blow. He called the host a mouthpiece for the status quo, someone who mocked visionaries to mask his own irrelevance. The insult was vicious, delivered with a cold smile, and it hit Colbert like a physical strike. The audience erupted, gasps and cheers colliding, as the guest's words exposed the host's vulnerability. Colbert's face flushed, his usual wit failing him. The host tried to recover, tossing out a joke to lighten the mood, but it landed hollow. The crowd's energy was with Musk now, his defiance resonating more than Colbert's barbs. The guest sat back, his point made while the host scrambled to regain footing. The segment closed with Colbert announcing a musical guest, his voice strained. Backstage, producers exchanged worried glances, knowing the interview had spiraled beyond salvage. The audience buzzed, their emotions raw as the confrontation hurtled toward its peak. The studio's atmosphere was electric as the show resumed after the musical guest, the audience still reeling from Musk's scathing takedown of Colbert. The host, now visibly rattled, returned to his desk with a forced smile, his usual polish, fraying at the edges. Musk, by contrast, exuded a quiet confidence, his earlier contempt replaced by an almost serene assurance. The crowd's energy was a tangled mix of excitement and unease, their loyalties split between the embattled host and the defiant guest. The confrontation had reached a boiling point, and every eye was locked on the stage. Colbert, determined to reclaim his authority, opened the segment with a new tactic. He acknowledged the heated exchange, framing it as a passionate clash of ideas, but quickly pivoted to a softer topic: Musk's personal motivations. The host asked about the sacrifices behind the guest's relentless drive, hoping to humanize him and diffuse the tension. The question was strategic, an attempt to steer the conversation away from hostility and toward empathy. Parts of the audience softened, intrigued by the prospect of a more vulnerable Musk, but others remained skeptical, sensing a trap. Musk's response was unexpected. He spoke candidly about the toll of his work, the isolation of being a target for criticism, and the weight of his ambitions. His tone was introspective, almost raw, and it struck a chord with the crowd. He didn't shy away from his flaws, but framed them as the cost of pushing boundaries. The audience's murmurs grew quieter, their earlier division giving way to a shared captivation. Colbert, sensing the shift, nodded along, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of frustration. His attempt to control the narrative was slipping again. The host pressed further, asking Musk about his critics, particularly those who viewed his influence as a threat to societal balance. The question was meant to provoke, but Colbert cloaked it in curiosity, hoping to catch the guest off guard. Musk's demeanor hardened, his vulnerability giving way to resolve. He didn't take the bait directly. Instead, he challenged the premise, arguing that critics often feared change more than they feared him. His words were sharp, aimed not just at detractors, but at Colbert's role in amplifying their voices. The audience stirred, some clapping, others tensing as the guest reclaimed the offensive. Colbert, now cornered, abandoned his softer approach. He accused Musk of dodging accountability, suggesting his rhetoric was a shield for unchecked power. The host's voice rose, his frustration spilling over as he painted the guest as a man who answered to no one. The crowd's reaction was chaotic, cheers and boos colliding, reflecting the room's fractured energy. Musk's eyes glinted, his calm facade cracking into something fiercer. He leaned forward, ready to strike back, his next words poised to tip the confrontation into chaos. The guest's retort was a masterstroke of precision and venom. He accused Colbert of weaponizing his platform to vilify those who dared to dream big, calling him a performer who profited from division while contributing nothing to progress. The insult was brutal, stripping away the host's moral high ground and exposing his reliance on mockery. The audience roared, a mix of shock and awe as Colbert's face froze, his silence deafening. The guest had turned the tables and the host had no answer. The studio was a cauldron of raw emotion, the audience's roar still echoing from Musk's brutal dismantling of Colbert's credibility. The host sat motionless, his frozen expression a stark contrast to his usual quick-witted charm. The guest's words had cut deep, exposing vulnerabilities Colbert couldn't mask. Musk leaned back, his face a mix of defiance and satisfaction, fully aware he'd seized control of the narrative. The crowd was a fractured sea of reactions, some reveling in the guest's audacity, others stunned by the host's unraveling. The confrontation had reached its zenith, and the path forward was treacherous. Colbert, grappling with the sting of Musk's attack, tried to regain his footing. He forced a laugh, acknowledging the guest's sharp tongue, but the gesture felt hollow. The host pivoted to a safer topic, asking about Musk's plans for sustainable energy, hoping to steer the conversation toward neutral ground. His voice lacked its usual conviction, and the audience sensed his retreat. The question was meant to rebuild rapport, but it came off as desperate, a plea for the segment to end without further damage. The room's energy shifted, the crowd's earlier fervor cooling into a tense anticipation. Musk, sensing weakness, didn't let the moment pass. He answered the energy question with enthusiasm, detailing ambitious projects to combat climate challenges, but wove in a subtle jab. He suggested that progress required bold action, not the kind of posturing found in talk show debates. The dig was indirect but unmistakable, framing Colbert's platform as irrelevant to real solutions. Parts of the audience clapped, drawn to Musk's vision, while others shifted uncomfortably, loyal to the host but shaken by his faltering performance. The guest was rewriting the night's story, and Colbert was struggling to keep up. The host, now visibly strained, made a final attempt to assert himself. He questioned Musk's optimism, citing recent setbacks in his ventures as evidence of overreach. The tone was sharp, a last-ditch effort to reclaim moral authority. But the accusation lacked the fire of earlier exchanges, and the audience's response was muted. Colbert's energy was spent, his earlier confidence eroded by Musk's relentless counters. The crowd's division deepened, their murmurs a mix of sympathy for the host and admiration for the guest's unyielding resolve. Musk's response was calm, almost magnanimous, as he acknowledged setbacks but framed them as stepping stones to progress. He spoke directly to the audience, bypassing Colbert, and shared a vision of a future where humanity thrived through courage and innovation. His words were uplifting, a stark contrast to the earlier venom, and they struck a powerful chord. The crowd erupted in applause, their earlier fractures giving way to a shared sense of possibility. Colbert sat silent, his role reduced to spectator as Musk commanded the room. The segment's end loomed, and the host had no choice but to wrap up. He thanked Musk, his voice flat, and announced the show's close. The audience's ovation was thunderous, directed more at the guest than the host. Backstage, producers exchanged grim looks, knowing the night had been a debacle for Colbert. The guest had not only survived the confrontation, but had turned it into a triumph, leaving the host humbled and the audience electrified. The applause thundered through the studio as the show's closing music swelled, a triumphant crescendo that seemed to belong more to Musk than to Colbert. The host stood, offering a perfunctory wave to the audience, his face a mask of professionalism that couldn't hide his defeat. Musk, by contrast, rose with an easy confidence, acknowledging the crowd with a nod that radiated victory. The audience was on its feet, their ovation a testament to the guest's commanding presence. The confrontation, which had begun with Colbert's sharp jabs, had ended with Musk reshaping the narrative and leaving the host in his shadow. As the cameras panned out, Colbert extended a handshake to Musk, a gesture meant to signal civility but tinged with reluctance. The guest accepted, his grip firm, his expression unreadable. The audience watched, some cheering the sportsmanship, others sensing the lingering tension. The host's attempt to reclaim dignity was overshadowed by the night's undeniable truth. Musk had turned the tables, exposing Colbert's reliance on mockery and emerging as the figure who inspired. The crowd's energy was electric, their emotions a mix of awe for the guest and quiet sympathy for the host's humbling. Backstage, the mood was somber among Colbert's team. Producers whispered about damage control, aware that the episode would dominate headlines and fuel online debates. The host retreated to his dressing room, his silence speaking volumes. He had entered the night expecting to challenge a titan, but had been outmaneuvered, his platform weaponized against him. Musk, meanwhile, was surrounded by a small entourage, his demeanor calm as he fielded praise from staff and fans. The contrast was stark, one man grappling with a rare loss, the other basking in a hard-won triumph. The audience filed out, their conversations buzzing with the night's drama. Many marveled at Musk's ability to turn hostility into opportunity, his vision resonating long after the insults faded. Others reflected on Colbert's struggle, acknowledging his courage in facing a formidable opponent, even if he'd faltered. The confrontation had been more than a clash of egos. It had revealed the power of conviction over cynicism, of ideas over rhetoric. The crowd's emotions were raw, their experience one they'd recount for days, each retelling amplifying the guest's dominance. On social media, clips of the exchange spread like wildfire, with Musk's biting retorts and soaring vision dominating the discourse. Commentators dissected the moment, some praising the guest for exposing the limits of performative critique, others defending Colbert's intent, but conceding his misstep. The narrative was clear. Musk had walked onto hostile ground and emerged not just unscathed but elevated, his message of progress cutting through the noise. The host's platform, once a stage for dismantling giants, had become the backdrop for his own unraveling. As the studio emptied, the weight of the night settled. Musk's triumph was complete, a testament to his ability to navigate and conquer even the most hostile arenas. The audience, emotionally spent but inspired, carried his words with them, a reminder that boldness could prevail over skepticism. Colbert, though bruised, would recover, but the night belonged to the guest who had turned a fiery argument into a defining moment. The story ended, not with a kick, but with a shift. The stage irrevocably changed by a titan who refused to bow.